Sophie Cordery, and I'm the Education Fellow here at the Ogunquit Museum of American Art. I am delighted to celebrate this occasion through the lens of the arts, the impact that access to the unique natural beauty of the Maine coastline has had on artistic practice. It feels quite poignant to be framed by this view of the ocean, which is not on the Marginal Way, itself yet gestures towards a long tradition of responding to this horizon and this environment. In 1925, when the Marginal Way was established by Josiah Chase, the town of Ogunquit was already known as a hub for artists, many of whom found inspiration in mediations on the juncture of light and water on the coast. John Dirks, a well-known cartoonist and sculptor, remembered summering in Ogunquit and the impact it had on his work. In an interview, he said, quote, "I spent all of my time running around the rocks, and that was the main motivation in all of the art that I've done. Ogunquit, Maine, and the rocks and the ocean were very important in my artistic development." This artistic response to the Marginal Way and the surrounding landscape continues today, as artists remain deeply engaged with the natural beauty and unique qualities of this place. It is a great honor to be with three distinguished artists this afternoon: Tom Glover, Christopher Volpe, and Don Gorvett. I'm delighted to speak with them this afternoon about how responding to this environment has impacted or informed their practice. And as I hand it over to them, please join me in a warm round of applause.
Thank you. It's nice to see so many people out here. Everybody can hear me okay? Yes, good. Unfortunately, Tom couldn't make it today. I'm an AI what am I saying there? It seems like everything's fake these days, but I also sort of feel like the warm-up band, so I'll try to get everybody going here. I guess we have some slides, so I will start off with those. I'm tasked to explain how I'm connected to this area, and it started for me back in 1979 at the University of New Hampshire, actually. John Laurent was winding down his tenure there, and that's who really got me connected to this area. He, of course, his father was here because of Hamilton Easter Fields, and there's a lot of history there, of course, and he began to talk about that and bring that up in class and bring us to his home where we could see his studio, but then walk around the house and see, you know, a Paul Klee and a Brock and a Hartley and Marin, and it was like, I was 19 years old. I had no idea who these people were, really. So it was, my eyes just opened right up. And what was I supposed to do? No big deal. Richard Diebenkorn was brought to a house in California. His teacher brought him there to the Stein's house, Gertrude Stein's brother, I think it was. And he saw all of these Matisses, and he said the same thing. What am I supposed to do? Just ignore it? So I haven't ignored it. I've dove into this area and started to really explore and take a look. So the Marginal Way obviously has been a big part of that, as I've walked out there many, many times, and that's obviously a beautiful and inspiring and just a moving place for me. I was driving down Berwick Road coming into town and looked out and saw the ocean, and I got a big smile on my face, and I'm like, it just happened. I mean, it's just, you see the ocean, there you go, you know. We got to look at slides, sorry, but there he is. That's the real Tom Glover. This is the AI. This is at low tide down on. I was standing right next to the water, looking up at some of the rock formations, and I'm looking at this. It looks a little bit like a Carl Schrader. I don't know why. That just struck me. But the colors, the shapes, the sort of mist coming in there, that's something that I am really excited about as I walk around there, and I tell this story to my students that I had a chance to go out onto Star Island and with a bunch of painters, and they all brought their boxes and they set up, and the wind's blowing through their hair, and I don't have any, so I wasn't worried about that. But then I took my camera or phone and walked around the island. We were out there for 4 hours. I went around again. I took close to 600 pictures. I did some sketches. I sat by the water. I just sort of let the whole thing, the whole experience, get into my blood, sort of, And those poor other guys were just standing there. They got one painting done. They got no other, research material. So that's just the way that I work. And in the studio, I like to start with more realistic paintings, and those begin to get deconstructed. That's the word I use. So this is more on the realistic side, I guess. I think actually all the ones I have here. That's, I was creeping down low in some of the rocks there, and I just looked through and saw this wave come through. So I snapped a shot of it, and that's a fairly good size painting. But yeah, I call it hidden wave because I felt like I was down there spying on the water coming in there, and like the cool ultramarines against that warm wave there in the front. All right. And this is what early on when you start off on the Marginal Way and look down, it's Orweed Cove, and it's a little bit, there was a fog in there, so there's a little bit of the beach at the top of the image. But some of those rocks are so sharp, and so I was kind of trying to highlight those. And I think I have this guy. And there's a problem with this because this isn't early morning, this is late afternoon. So I've little problem there, but I like the colors. I was using the blues against the oranges and reds. That's a thing that I teach my students. Simultaneous contrast, developed by a Frenchman, his name is Chevreau, and he first noticed that as he worked with dyes and textiles, and his workers kept bringing him these samples of black, and the blacks, they said, were changing. Well, they do change when you put a different color beside them. So he developed the color wheel as we know it today. So then I think I have one more. Oh no, that was it. Sorry. Guess who's up? Take it away, Chris.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that's all right. So I'm also very deeply influenced by the ocean. I grew up on Long Island, and I spent a lot of time as a teenager, sort of on my own, walking around, in all kinds of weather, brooding about life and everything. And it always felt to me, I've thought about that a lot, and I've been to the second, so I think the Marginal Way feels a lot to me like some of those places on Long Island. In particular, there's this large, it's not as large as the Marginal Way, but there's this kind of hilly cliff in Oyster Bay Cove, and I used to climb on up it, and there was a bench on the top of it, and I could look out over the bay up towards the ocean. And in those days, I wanted to be a poet. So I often had a notebook with me and some book of poems, and one of the poems that I read there repeatedly was a poem by Dylan Thomas about his turning 30. It was a poem on his birthday, I think it might be called, and or poem in October. and I made it a kind of tradition for me, a ritual. Every time I would get to a high place, especially if it was near the ocean, and read this poem by Dylan Thomas. And because it's all about the passage of time, and it's about he was from Wales, and so there's a lot of seabirds and waves and the knock of nets on the sea webbed wall and stuff like that. Wonderful stuff. And so I have several times since I've been up here. I came up in '94 also to go to UNH. I've done that ritual on the Marginal Way. I've had that book of poems with me, same one I had when I was 16, and I read it to the ocean, and it's just a comforting thing. The thing about that, I thought about the ocean a lot, because I have, as an artist, I've done a lot of seascapes, and I've thought about this, and I think for me, there was this feeling of the world kind of stopping at the edge of the water. Like eternity was over there. Like everything was like, on the land was kind of like, this is human, this is man, this is material, this is what we think we know, and then there's the margin of the water, and everything out there is mystery. It's where what we know sort of stops. And that was the feeling that I had as a kid, and still sometimes have as an adult, this feeling of like, we would come to places like the Marginal Way for the vastness, to feel that margin of like mortality and self next to the vast, next to eternity, or as close as we can get to it on the Maine coast. Who's that tick clicker? Yeah, so this is not by me, this is by Emil Carlson. Who knows Emil Carlson? He's a really underrated and fairly unknown painter who came to the Ogunquit art colony in 1905 and kept returning for a few years. And he painted multiple views of this Bald Head Cliff. Sure. When I was in UNH, one winter I lived in Cape Nettic, and so I spent a lot of time walking between where I lived and the coast, the ocean, and I got very familiar with this particular cliff too. So these are almost all studies, at least on the left, those are all studies, as far as I can tell, of the same area. Some of those are larger paintings, but a lot of them some are smaller. The paintings on the right by Emil Carlson are a bit different, but they strike me as the kind of view you would see, like from the Marginal Way, right? You're just looking out over the ocean like that. And this is a painting of mine that I know is 100% influenced by those Emil Carlson paintings. This is on the way to Appledore, the shoals. But that's that same feeling of spirit, or the immaterial that begins where the ocean begins. Pretty cool, Emil Carlson. When I was first coming over here, I sought out the ocean, sought out the water right away, and I learned pretty quickly that there had been an art colony here in Ogunquit, and it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, because I didn't see any trace of it now. So I did some research, and I came here. I saw Charles Woodbury's paintings here. I learned about him and how he ran a school. And I was a plein air painter as well, and I taught. And so I brought people here, right, to this, and many times on the Marginal Way as well. It's a great place to bring a painting class, because you've got a nice big parking lot. Everyone can just short on up. Don't have to go. It's not too bad a hike. Restaurants are there if you need to sneak in and use the restroom. So here's a couple other paintings from that time. So there's a Emil Carlson up there from 1915 called Rough Sea, and it has a little bit of a Charles Woodbury feel too, the way that, that waves getting sucked up there.
Yep.
Or underneath it is a painting of mine, just a pretty small painting. It's, I don't know, 11 inches. It's called Anomaly, and it is also that same idea of something pulling the ocean up. A couple on the left, you can see there's the very blue sky is an Edward Hopper that he did in Ogunquit, probably on the Marginal Way. And those other paintings are of mine, of Ogunquit and the area. But I no longer paint plein air, and I don't even use oils that much anymore. The painting down on the lower right is done with tar. And so what's happened is that around 2016, I discovered a series that on the ocean that I ended up going just head over heels right into, and didn't look back. So I use tar that you can get in a big bucket. It's liquefied, and I'll use chemicals that will dry it, and that thin it so that it's workable, and it blends fairly well with oils. So I just use a monochrome palette of the tar plus titanium white paint, and I'm able to get all kinds of beautiful earthy and tobacco-like tones depending on the ratios. The one on the left up there, called Water Spout, is again that same theme of this like vortex coming from the sky and pulling things up. There's no question that's in my mind that's where that came from. So this particular series is based on Moby Dick. And I started using tar for just obscure reasons. I'm not even sure, except that I was researching some 19th century painters who were using tar, particularly Albert Pinkham Ryder, and I decided to try it. But as soon as I did, it reminded me of Long Island, of the industrial and suburban world I lived in, and that as a child, as an adolescent, I was very critical of. And at about this time, I was also learning about climate change and the confluence of Moby Dick as a metaphor for hubris, right? Over-harvesting, and they were going for oil. So that was, whale oil was the first industrial revolution, it greased the wheels of the Industrial Revolution, and it was the only reason there are still whales alive is because we started finding it in the ground and discovered how to use it. But it's a fossil fuel, and this is the same stuff. This tar is created in the processing of coal, so it's liquefied coal tar. That's what it is. So I took the feeling of Moby Dick, if not necessarily illustrating it, but I took the message that I took from it, which is a kind of foundational myth for late capitalism, in my mind. The idea that we are perilously close to destroying ourselves by overreaching and hunting down nature rather than trying to live harmoniously with it. So all these paintings have quotes from Moby Dick as their titles, and they all have this kind of foreboding imagery, this kind of brooding imagery in these darks. So on the right is Charles Woodbury's Mid-Ocean. It's his big salon painting, I think. And on the left and above are two other paintings of mine using the tar that I think are similar, especially the one on top. It's called Dark Wave and Swells, and I hang it in an antique frame because I like the idea of referring to the 19th century and the early 20th century as something in the past, but also it's looking towards the future. So it's got this confluence of past and present. So it makes us think about time, but it's a direct reference to 19th century seascape paintings like Woodbury's especially. So I would say that I've been influenced in ways that I that aren't necessarily apparent right away when you look at the work, but it's all there. It's an undercurrent entirely. So thanks. Hand it over to Don.
Thank you very much. I think I can do this. Well, I first of all want to thank all of you for coming here on a magnificent day, and the museum for affording us this opportunity to be able to have the discussion. And thank you all so much. I had a great art teacher 5 years in high school. As an 8th grader, I was able to go to the high school, and that afforded me an extra year with my teacher, Eleanor Marvin. I used to go on vacations with her family during the summer. And in 1967, we went on vacation to Wells, and at that time, we would take rides to Ogunquit. And we determined at that time that in 1968, when I graduated, I would spend a summer painting in Ogunquit before I went to the museum school. So we came to Ogunquit. I found a wonderful little one-room cabin in the woods next to a little bit larger cabin that Annabelle Lewis had built in the 1930s. So I spent my entire summer using the money that I earned during my high school evenings, doing dishes somewhere. And so I arrived in Ogunquit. I rode my bicycle here from Burlington, Massachusetts. And that was the beginning. So I arrived here in 1968. And my idea was to be able to go out each day and draw or paint a painting, do a painting every day in addition to some drawings. And that was my goal before I arrived at the museum school. And I was somewhat overwhelmed because it's the first time that I ever left home and lived somewhere else on my own, which was really, really great. And Annabelle Lewis was a retired child psychologist. So there was a great dovetail there. And she was wonderful, and I used my money to be able to paint all summer. And additionally, for any number of years after that, I stayed in that little one-room cabin and took care of Annabelle. And she lived to be 100. So coming to Ogunquit, I was not entirely aware of the history of the people who worked here. I became somewhat aware of it because downtown, Chris Ritter had a fabulous gallery on Main Street. And when I went in, I realized, as you all did, that I was looking at Paul Claes and I was looking at Max Beckmann's and all of these people. And I thought, oh, okay. And then Chris Ritter also had a great gallery on Route 1. It was called the Pine Tree Gallery, which is now storage units. I shouldn't have said that. But my interest in the people who had painted and drew here over the 100 years seemed to be in a distant past because I had grown up with my teacher. She introduced me in the 8th and 9th grade. I know who Kokoschka was, and I know who Beckmann. I know who all these people were. And Eleanor's husband was one of Tom Benton's favorite students.
Yeah.
And but she came from Oregon, and they didn't think that way in Oregon. They thought Tom Benton was a regionalist, and the Oregon people were really much more, they thought they were more progressive. And so she thought differently about art than actually Mr. Marvin had done.
Hey.
And so my first adventures I rode my bike each day with an easel and a canvas on my back. And that was pretty, on the highway, that was pretty tricky. And I used to have my canvas faced out, and cars would slow down. And I really didn't like that, especially when the painting wasn't finished. So they would follow me the whole way home. So I started turning the canvas in reverse. But that was sort of one of my hallmarks locally. But interestingly enough, one of my first interest in the Marginal Way was painting the tide pools. And I would be down in the tide pools with glue tempers on my lap with the board, and I would be looking into the tide pool. And one lady came along and she said, "What are you doing?" And she said, I said, "Well, I'm doing the tide pools." And she looked in and she said, "Well," she could see what was there. And there was this whole world of rich, beautiful textures. I mean, it had a Hyman Bloom aspect to it. The surfaces and all the textures and the colors. And there would be an occasional crayfish, or not crayfish, but there would be a starfish in the bottom. And a crab would peek out from the seaweed. And but each day I would go along the Marginal Way, and I would also ride down to Wells and do a lot of painting. And interesting, you had mentioned that we were not on the Marginal Way here, but many old timers told me that they considered the Marginal Way a walk from Ogunquit to the Cliff House. So there's a little bit of space here for us to work in.
Right.
And so I painted tide pools, and I would go down the cove, and Sailor Sid would be down there, and Mrs. Baratsky would have her little gallery in Perkins Cove. So Perkins Cove, and it was a town more than it was a summer resort. So everything was much more quiet. There were no houses on the island, just the island house, which was Easterfield had built. Did he build the house? He built the house and bought a lot of the land in Perkins Cove to be able to establish the art school, which is now mountain high tops. The ground. Enough of that, Don. So eventually, I would live in Gloucester during the winter and come to Ogunquit every summer. And then finally, I moved in 1990 to Ogunquit permanently with Mrs. Marvin and Mr. Marvin. And so I really started primarily as a painter. And the tide pools that I did were the result of my experiences painting on stage. I think if I ever had an art school and I wanted to teach people about painting, it would be on the stage. Because you use your whole body, you're able to think in large masses, you can go from out here into here. And you can pull the backdrop up, get back, see what it looked like, get back down. You could draw and paint with large sticks and brushes. So it was a very physical, and the glue tempers were magnificent. So I actually used them a lot for these little miniature tide pools which I had done. And so I should probably show you, I don't know what's on here. Let's try something here. That's me. Yes, that is me. I'm on the rocks and the tide is coming in, and that happened occasionally. I actually live on a wharf right now, and this tide still comes in my apartment. But it's not bad because it goes right out. So that's me on the Marginal Way. And this is an early painting that I had done. And I used to go out to do drawings in the Marginal Way. And then this one I actually did back in the cabin. And so forth. And let's see, what else do we have here? These are two of the tide pools.
This is the tide.
And you can see, the one on the right with the crab and what do I call it? The peeping crab. And I also did, from these tide pools, I did a silkscreen book, which illustrated, it was a story about a seagull and a crab. And I have the book, and they're silkscreen prints on acetate. So as you turn the pages of the acetate, the story develops, until eventually at the bottom you can find the crab by himself, and so forth. And then, let's see where we go from here. This is a drawing that I did in the Marginal Way of that 100-year-old, it's now more than 100-year-old, the cedar tree.
Yeah.
And again, I'm retrospect, I shouldn't be doing this, but there was that wonderful house on the right, which was the Bonnet studio.
Clearly.
And Eleanor told me that in the 1930s and 40s, he used to do a tea there every Sunday. And so the house is gone now.
It is.
And we're getting a lot of really enormous buildings, not post and beam, girder and beam on the Marginal Way. So, you know, that's what it is. And then, let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, there's a woodcut, there's a drawing on the right for a Woodbury studio from the Marginal Way. And on the left is a reduction woodcut. So it turned out that eventually what I sort of evolved into doing, because I love drawing, I started doing a lot of woodcuts. And the woodcut medium, as is a reduction, is wonderful because you cut in layers and you print in layers. And you have to make a determination from the very beginning how many prints will exist, because the block is continually being reduced to make a window for the previous color to remain. So, you know, the first color would be white, you'd print the edition, maybe 18 or whatever, then you'd wash the white off, cut the areas of the block where you want the white to remain, then layer the next color, and print the edition again, and then cut where you want that color to remain, then print it. So it's a laborious and time-consuming work, and you don't really know what you have until the end. And so since you're simultaneously editioning as you create it, you can come out with a number of prints which you feel very good about, and you can also feel very bad about a lot of prints that you made, which, but that's the risk of reduction print. And it is a very risky medium, but that's what makes it so exciting. It's sort of like a high wire act without a net below. And so this may be the final two works that I have. Oh no, this is that. There on the right is a drawing of the Marginal Way. I used to like to go outside and draw with India ink and a pen on an absorbent mat board. And I would try to do them in a day. Sometimes it'd take me a couple of days. On the left you can see a woodcut of Winter in the Marginal Way, and which is in the museum collection, which actually the last time it was shown was 17 years ago. So, that was a very complex print. And so you're looking at the wood block and you're trying to do more and more in smaller and smaller areas. So you have to be very careful about how much wood you take off that block, because if the wood's gone, you can't do it. So I'm trying to orchestrate it like in music. A great orchestrator of sound knows the sounds, knows all of the instruments and the sounds that they can make, and the colors that can come out of the orchestra. And they weave them beautifully in and out. And so they may even make one line of sound that appears to be from a single instrument, but it's ambient because it may be coming from several instruments with similar sounds. So what you try to do in the woodcut is make as ambient, visual ambiance as possible by introducing more and more color into a smaller and smaller area. So it's a lively surface and a texture, you know, as you would do if you were painting. Or, you know, and again, I mentioned I'm in Bloom because there was a show 2 years ago at the Museum of Fine Arts, and it was a magnificent exhibition, and the colors and the surfaces, you don't need to know what the image is, because he wasn't a picture maker. He loved the color and application of color. The result may have been an image that you could recognize, but far more important was the beauty and the intricacy of the abstract aspects of what he was doing, pure abstract beauty, which fortunately did take on a shape and form. Many of them were cadavers. He did like to go and go. He did do a lot. Bloom did a lot of, and when you look at them, you think these are magnificent, but you know. And he did beautiful. He would do a chandelier, or he'd do a Christmas tree. And when you looked at it, you know, you just saw all of this magnificent surface and beauty and color. And I think this must be the last of the, this, I'm surprised, I don't know what's here. This is actually a very early reduction woodcut, and it's done from behind, it's done in the area of Helen Horn's house. looking by Narrow Cove, and I called it, I guess, what did I call it? Perkins Cove? Winter Twilight. And I really, really enjoyed putting the smoke in that chimney. So occasionally I would stay in Ogunquit beyond the summer, and hopefully I could stay in Mrs. Gray's cottage, which didn't have any heat until late October. And that was a good time to be in Ogunquit because everyone was gone. And the atmosphere was and it was like summer and quiet, and you could hear all those crickets and things. And so I did a lot of work on that stretch of property. And the Ogunquit's over to the museum is on the left. So you can see that rock right out there. That's a great swimming place. So this must be the last one. No! I'm so sorry. This is a view from way up top, looking down into Perkins Cove from, what is the street here? Juniper Point, yeah, Juniper Lane.
I live on Juniper Lane.
You do? Well, there's your view.
Yeah.
And you can see this was a very complicated woodcut with lots of colors and cutting, and yes, yeah, and I think we've got to now. There.
Well, thank you all so much. I mean, I think this speaks to just what an icon the Marginal Way is. There are so many access points to thinking about it, the atmosphere, surface, color. So this is just incredible. I do have a few questions, but I think it would be nice to open it up to our audience and see if there are questions that the audience would like to ask our distinguished panelists. If anyone is interested in asking a question, please raise your hand and we can pass along the microphone. I do have one question to start us off. Just thinking as an educator, we get so many students who visit the museum who are interested in pursuing a career in the arts. They might just be going to art school, they might be just thinking about starting that process. And students are also great champions of the environment, of protecting the environment, as we talked about. So what advice would you give for an early career student who's interested in pursuing the arts, and how would you advise them to navigate nature in order to explore that career in any way? Tom, we'll start with you.
It reminds me of this story I heard about this guy was exploring how artists develop, and he would go into schools, and at first grade he'd say, all right, who's an artist? And everybody would raise their hand. And then he would go into fifth grade, and about half of them would raise. And by the time he got to high school, 2 of them would raise their hand. So you got to stick with it. And that's Laurent. I bring up Laurent again, and my students hear this all the time, so I apologize, but he always said, think of it as a 9-to-5 job. Go to it, go to your studio, get it done, something, anything. Put something down. You're probably going to throw it away, but every once in a while there's a spark there, there's something that will take hold of you. Walker Percy said it's always good to be on to something, and when that happens, boy, you're off. And so that's my advice. Stick with it. If you love it, if it's your passion, you gotta keep at it. So.
Yeah, falling in love with the tools is important because you're going to be spending a lot of time with those tools. And it takes a while, right? But there's this school of thought that says you should learn all of the techniques of painting first, and then you get to do something, if you're lucky, that's original, and that's a personal expression that's just you. Eventually you'll find your voice. And I like one of the things I liked about Woodbury's teaching is that he kind of just pushed people out of that. He just dropped them in front of nature and said, all right, what do you see? What are the big shapes? He would say, paint it doing something. Don't just paint it. Paint in verbs. Paint what you think is happening. And if you're thinking about painting that way, you're not thinking about meticulous academic principles. You have to go on your nerves. And there's the idea that also that Robert Henry had, that if you have a passionate enough if you have something to say, you will invent the tools that you need to say it. Which is kind of the opposite of learn how to use the tools first, and then maybe you get to, maybe you'll find your voice. I don't think that it's a black and white thing. Obviously, everybody's different, but when I do teach, I tend to spend a lot of time just denigrating technique. I'll say, look, it's just technique. I don't care how pretty you can make this painting. That's not why we're here. What do you want to say? And it's intimidating. It's hard to know what we want to say. But the thing is, it happens through the work. You have to let go of all of that training and what people want to see and go on your nerve. Once you start down that direction, of course, all the things you know about painting, all the technique comes back, but only the stuff that you need. That's the stuff that comes in. And eventually, all artists, if they stick with it long enough, they invent their own technique anyway. So it's much more important to figure out what you have to say or just improvise. Just get something down, like Tom said, rather than worrying about whether or not you're talented. I think that's one of the biggest things too. We all worry that, this has to be good, because if it's not, that means I'm not good. What am I doing? I'm fooling myself. I'm not an artist. There's these trains of thought, and so you have to cut that off right away by not thinking, not comparing yourself to anybody, not worrying what people are going to think. It's very difficult, and you have to fool yourself, because people can say, "Oh, you learn the rules, then forget them." Sure, but that doesn't happen like that. You've got to go into the work with a kind of authentic, raw kind of honesty and courage, I think. Which means letting go, forcing yourself not to make paintings that you think other people are going to like. Those are the paintings that are going to get you where you need to be. And where that is a practice that sustains itself, because there's no arrival, but if you stick with it long enough, you'll find that passionate, anguished drive never goes away. And you'll look behind you one day and there's an old body of work there. I think that's how it goes.
I got one too. Yes.
Well, I'll start off with the bad scene first. There was a Boston Printmakers Biennial, and it took place in Teachers College. Where is that in Massachusetts? Anyway, at the gallery. Jim Dine was the juror. So during the biennial, everyone got into the auditorium, and one young man stood up and he said, "Mr. Dine, what do you suggest for a young artist who is aspiring and would like to be able to continue in his career?" And Jim Dine looked at him and he said, "Forget about it." He said, "You're not going to make it." But that was Jim Dine. And so, that's one way of looking at it, which you don't want to do. It was really very... So, but education is everything. And I was just very, very fortunate to have one of the great, great art teachers. And her education was phenomenal beyond the fact she was a Reed College graduate as well. And she was a writer. And boy, she could put a lesson plan on the board for these kids, which was phenomenal. And the things that they would come out with as a result of her communicating through the lesson plan on the board. What did snow look like at night, through lights? And so these kids would do these amazing nights with the snow light up and the whole, so, I just had a young boy come in the gallery the other day, and his father said, he always draws, he's really, really good. So the boy went over to the flat files on top, and they said, we've got to go now. And the boy said, no. He said, do you have a pencil and paper? So we gave him a piece of paper and a pencil, and he was drawing on top of the flat files. Said, we really need to be going. Nope, and he's busy. So he's doing a drawing, and he did this wonderful drawing of a man holding a lobster. So, that's kind of what you have to have when you're doing your work. A sort of a language and a vision to be able to go, as you were saying, from one place to another. But the difficulty is that there has been, and I was very fortunate, there are some schools that have no programs for the visual arts or music. And then there were the schools that told young people that music and art were minor credits, minor subjects. What does a child think when he's told it's a minor subject? And by the way, you get 2 credits for it as well. So they equated it, not that gym isn't a great thing, because that's all I wanted to do when I was young, but they were equating it with gym. And so you had this disconnect, which immediately they were being uneducated. So, there's a number and then my teacher, this was funny, Eleanor would take me to the museum school each year to inform them of my progress. Then I would sit with the dean in the office, Eugene Ward would be there, and he'd be looking over all the portfolios, etc. And so Eleanor said, could you write a letter to the high school? And Eugene said, oh yes. So Eugene Ward wrote a letter to the school saying Don should be in the art room as much as possible. So he showed it to the principal, and the principal said, Eleanor, this is not an art school. But I must say that I spent many, many hours in the arts class when I was in school, and I shouldn't say this, but I had a wonderful history teacher, and I loved history. But I'd go to the door, the entrance to the door, and he'd put his arm over it, and he'd say, go to the art room, Don. So I had a lot of corruption like that going on, and so I'm very uneducated, really, but I can't do what I do. So, but it's so important that it's treated as a major subject, not a minor one. And I think the people who are in the town have the ability to tell the school what they think should be contributed, whether there should be an art department and a music department, and how much of it there should be for the students. And I think this is what needs to happen. So it's young education. It starts at the very, very, very bottom. And you're right. I love the story. How many? If you ask somebody, as you said, when they're very young, who's an artist? Everybody raises their hand. But they're beaten down eventually. And as you said, it gets less and less. And so you have a culture that, and I love athletics and sports, but the indication of how important it is to our culture is how much people are being paid to play that sport. Many millions of dollars. And I love sports. That's all I wanted to do until I found out that I wanted to paint and draw all the time. And I quit football, I quit hockey, I quit baseball. And I was in the art room the whole time and never regretted any of it, and so forth. And the coach in football used to say, Don, your shoulders are getting a little thin. He said, when are you going to come back and play football? So anyway, that's about it. That's all I can say. And Tom,
I was told by my college advisor, I walked into him and I said, how do I become an artist? And he said to me, marry rich. That was my advice. So.
That's good advice.
It does make me think, as you were saying, we're equating the arts to different subjects, but we've mentioned so many other topics here too: music, literature, poetry. And Christopher, I know that you also studied poetry and bring poetry into your paintings as well. Can you speak to how your paintings are quite interdisciplinary, how you look to other subjects a bit more and bring those in as part of the process, and Tom and Don too, referencing music and other arts would be very interesting.
Chris? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. When I started doing the paintings that became the Loomings series, the Moby Dick paintings in tar, it was a full circle for me, because until then I'd been learning to paint, and I mean, I was in literature and writing and journalism for most of my life until I was 41. And then I started painting. And it was just exciting because it was all new thing to me, learning what paint is and how to use it and what's been done and all that. But it kind of felt like a perpetual sort of experiment in a way. Like, I didn't really know what I was doing, so my work was just like all over the map. I was chasing whatever artist of the week that I was enamored of. So when I found the theme of Moby Dick, and it was through rereading the novel, and there's a painting described in the novel, like really early on, like in the 3rd chapter or something, and I wanted to paint that painting because it sounded so cool. And so that kind of like happened by chance, but as soon as it did, I was like, oh my, this is what I should be doing, because this brings together all my knowledge of literature and the years I spent in wanting to be a writer, and informs what I'm doing as an artist. So I always felt out of place in sort of like places like Todd Bonita's gallery, let's say, because I felt like I'm not that guy who goes out and paints the beautiful thing. I didn't think. I mean, I don't think of paint as representational, because I didn't have any training on those lines. I never learned, the fundamentals. I learned it later, but I think that having spent so much time in literature, and also I taught art history too for a while before I started painting. That was the bridge. I have what feels to me like a very natural approach to painting, but I think it's different from the way it's taught in school and the way a lot of people do think of it. Because I think of the material and the images as very much like I thought of images in poetry and the language of poetry. The image and the language have to work together to create this hybrid thing, and the material and the image in my painting also does the same thing to me, and there's a metaphoric and symbolic value to the image in poetry, and it doesn't mean just one thing, but it means something. And I think of that in my painting too. Like, hopefully it doesn't just hit you over the head and say, I mean this, but hopefully also it gives you a sense that there's meaning here. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of education too, art, is it's all technique. And that's why I waste my breath like telling people don't worry about technique. We're so afraid to talk about how art is meaningful, like what it means. Why don't we ever talk about that? Why don't we talk about like Rembrandt and talk about the depths of humanity that he could get? Like, it's like we don't have the tools to talk about the depth of art. We're usually talking about the surface, and I think that might be one of the reasons that it gets such short shrift in our culture, because people just see it as decoration. They don't know what it is. They don't know how to look at it. So I don't know what the fault is of that, but and again, maybe I'm just totally biased because I'm really informed by literature as a painter, like you say. So this extra medium, it's like I'm approaching it from a completely different sort of inside out kind of way. So I don't know.
You know, that it's interesting you mentioned visual imagery today is so, to use the word, very inexpensive, not cheap. But there's so many ways that people can be exposed to color printing images, you know, looking at cell phones continually, never looking up, watching television. Now they can walk around with television. But visual music has always been a big motivator for me. I'm a big audiophile. And I love not only listening to music, but also reading biographies of people and musicians, because they are people and you see how they didn't solve or did solve problems that came up in their life. So, you know, it gives you a kind of a wonderful, you know, sometimes you don't even know how these people actually survived to get along. But music does nothing like going to Symphony Hall and sitting in the first balcony in seats 1 and 2 on top of that stage and hearing the sound come out of that concert hall. Oh my gosh, and it just is amazing. So that's one of my big inspirations. When I'm working in the studio each day, you know, my CDs I never put back. So they're piled up all over the studio and, you know, here and there, and my multiple CD disc player is constantly going. And it's sort of the theater for me of sound, which I'm married to my work. And of course, it's certain kinds of sounds I can hear when I'm working, but others, you know, I'm not going to do the Ring of the Nibelung while I'm working. So yeah, it has been a great, music has been one of my big interests, yeah.
And I, again, challenging my concern, yes. And if any interdisciplinary projects you bring, but if not, that's okay.
Well, yeah, music is big with me. I work with a group of painters, and we have done, actually did a painting while music, a live combo played while we were trying to interpret the music as they played in front of an audience, and we got timed, you know, and people were, it was fun to have this sort of reaction of people immediate, because most of what I do is pretty solitary. You're in the studio and you got your music playing and you're getting excited by the music, but I also have those ideas of connotative and denotative. You know, you denote literally something, and the connotations are the sort of, that's where the meat is, right? So you get into what are the ideas, what is, you get under the surface and sort of delve into those ideas. And I'm fascinated by what, at the British Museum, there's the gateway, the Assyrian gateway, those statues of, what is it, a bull, combination of a bull with eagle wings with a man's head. And I'm like, what kind of mind put that together? And that's the kind of thing I gotta try to do sometime. So I've thought of trying to mingle mythological imagery together and I was using acetate to put these images on and then putting them, overlapping them and just trying to find a new meaning to some of this stuff. And what were these people thinking when they used all these symbols? And that's in a whole another area. Mythology, that's a whole nother area I'm interested in. But I'm also interested in Fenway Park. That's another place that I fall in love with, and is a religious place for me. So there's so many different things that I get into. What does a Rembrandt abstract painting look like? If Rembrandt were painting abstractly, what was, you know, so I've got some crazy things going through my head. So, but it would be nice to have time to dive into that. Notre Dame was a big motif for me many years ago. I did a big series of the buttresses and abstracting those and trying to get into, I don't know, it was really fun. Anybody else?
And any questions for our panelists? I'll open it up to our audience. Yes, in the back.
message. To the public.
Okay, I love the rocks and the waves and the ocean, and I grew up down here on these rocks. And then love the tidal pools too. But if I was a painter, I know that's what I would be painting. And the ocean has a lot of different moods to it. But I want to ask you now, because I saw a lot of your paintings on the rocks in Marginal Way. But what if I put you up on the beach here, and what would you find interesting to paint on the beach? Would it be an empty beach full of tourists, winter, summer, seasons, or what would you pick up as an artist that you would like to expand upon from the beach?
Okay, sure. I spent a lot of hours in the sand dunes, and I loved painting sand dunes when you could walk in them. And it's just the creaminess and the color of all the different whites and the white colors and the grasses and the textures, and also the expansiveness of the sand in the distance. There was a wonderful artist whose works inspired me in that regard, and it was Nicolas de Stael. Do you know Nicolas de Stael? Sure. So he did these wonderful paintings of rooftops and beaches and harbors, but there's something about the color, and also trails winding through the dunes, which have a certain sort of melancholic feeling sometimes in the autumn when the colors really get beautiful. But, the beach is filled with all kinds of, it's infinite, just color. The Woodbury paintings of the beach are really nice. I really like those. Do you want?
Yeah, I agree. It's just kind of endless. There's so much you could do. I was looking really closely at a Wyeth yesterday, looking at the way Andrew Wyeth did sand. It's like these tiny little dots. But he managed to get that feeling of melancholy in it, and it's the feeling that's so important. I mean, that's what painting is about, It's not about like the every blade of grass or the every grain of sand. It's about the feeling, and it's about that indescribable, elusive experience that we have, and that we all come to the beach for at different times, if I ask you, I bet a lot of people would say their favorite time on the beach is like after 4 o'clock, like maybe 5, when the sun's no longer, trying to fry us like eggs, and you can just feel the expansiveness of it, and I think that's what I would be chasing. I was be trying to paint the vast. Maybe I'd put one rock in there just so you get like a little sense of scale, but I'd be going for the big stuff.
I have done several paintings of beaches, and I am interested very much in the horizontalness of it, of a beach, and the color, and I like to Laurent used to say, get away with as much empty space as you can in a painting, and I love Diebenkorn and his areas of just, he gets to almost color field painting in some of those areas, and then you get the architecture of the drawings, and so that is how I would kind of approach it. It would be thinking about it in more abstract terms, and then melding that with the ocean, and there's so much there. And Fairfield Porter once said about Andrew Wyeth, he says, I really don't like Andrew Wyeth because there's too much Andrew Wyeth in them. So it just made me think of that when you say it. I like Andrew Wyeth for the most part. But he painted those sand paintings, with flicking the brush. It's a technique. So
He used the technique he needed. That's right.
Amazing. Well, yes, we do have another question here.
Maybe I can bring it over here. Like you.
As an artist, how do you reconcile the aspect of nature where everything is changing with the challenge of capturing the moment?
So, think something should do. This, that, takes.
Dude, this is not for me. That's Captain Wolf's guy.
Stuff.
Capturing the moment. I work from photographs, so they just freeze it. You're done, right? I understand that you're right about for plein air painters. You're standing out there, and the clouds are moving, and the light is shifting, and the wind is blowing, and the canvas is falling over, and the bugs and the. And I have taught some classes, but I always tell my students, why do you go through this? And you're supposed to inspire us, Tom. And so I'm like, all right, I get it. It's very romantic, with that. But, you have to put up with so much. But to your point, the idea of the landscape is changing constantly and not often in a good way. And I think about how I can sort of put those messages, sort of subtlety, the connotations into landscapes. And sometimes I do little things in the paintings. I'd have to have something specific in mind. I'll stick a little crane in or some, in the distance, or Eakins used to do that. People say Akins, some people say Eakins, Thomas Akins. And you see in the background of one of the sculling paintings, some of the scullers that are out there on the river in Philadelphia, and in the background is the bridge with the train on it. So there's a lot of artists that were doing that. The Impressionists were doing that, sort of the industrial creep that was coming up. So that's what I try to do in some of my landscapes, is sneak in these little moments, or a little, I don't know, a little darkness in there. So that's my take.
It depends on the object. What are you doing when you're painting? What is the object of the exercise? Are you making a picture? Are you concerned about a particular point in time during the day? And some artists may go each day at that time to try to replicate that imagery with some reasonable accuracy. But I remembered when I would go out and paint during the day, I might be in the sand dune painting that image for 5-6 hours, and the light would constantly be changing, but I would constantly be changing my canvas so that no direct light was coming on it. What I was doing was I was organizing the painting according to all of the things that were being offered to me in the way of light and color. So I was essentially assembling a painting based on the traverse, based on all of the changing light and colors. So it was a process of construction, and picture making was not really, in the end, my idea. I was, and is such when I do my woodcut, they're constructions. They're assemblages of ideas about things. I don't make pictures. Picture making is good for a person that wants to be reminded of what they think they already know. So you can remind them of that, and they feel very good. It's not really a process of discovery. It's one of confirmation. And who wants to constantly be confirming what you already think you know? So when somebody says, I know what I like, that means they probably will never learn anything. It's true. So some artists do work entirely with what's offered up to them during the entire day. And it works. But it depends on what your idea is when you're doing it. And you could go crazy following a light around objects and trying to replicate that light. So that's my experience.
Sid Solomon once said, when I started painting, the painting has to do at least half the work. So you respond to a painting, it's especially in abstract painting. John Rent, who I mentioned again, he always said that painting realistically is like a golf game. You know where you're going, you know how to get there, you do it. And he said abstract painting was more like playing tennis. You hit the ball over the net, you don't know where it's going to come back. So I always like that little analogy, and I'm sure,
Exactly.
Back to Woodbury for a minute, he would say, get the big things first. Paint what made you want to paint it in the first place. And in order to do that, you can't paint the way it looks right now. You can't. Because you have an experience of it, and your experience is what you want to express. I found plein air painting fascinating because it felt like an antagonistic relationship between me and the real. You know, it's like it's very hard to not paint exactly what you're looking at. It's very difficult to try to put something in it. It's very hard. So that's why most of us end up becoming studio painters in the long run, because that's where the imagination gets free play, and that's where you can really meld, you know, the real with what you feel. You know, that's you. I like plein air painting insofar as you can develop a vocabulary of the visual or of a particular place. Like you can keep painting the same place a number of times, then you go back to the studio, and don't just copy your paintings, but just wing it. Just launch into that, and you have to rely on your memories of it. And so you're not distracted by the demands of representation. And so I still do paint outside sometimes, but it's always like that Woodbury approach. Like you go big, you get the big shapes, get the color value relationships right, and then use just enough detail that doesn't detract from the big feeling that you've got in it. I like that advice. I try to keep that as my ideal. So another last thing I'll say about that. One thing that a mentor told me once that was very helpful was pay more attention to what's on your easel than what's out there. And that goes to what you were saying. It becomes a dialogue with the painting that's informed by what you're seeing and feeling, but it's mostly, I think, in the end, if it's going to be more than just a picture of something that reminds you of a thing, it's going to have to be something that you create. It's got to be created. It's not copied from out there. It's created, so lean into that. And in order to do that, you have to spend more time with your painting, paying attention to what's happening on the canvas than you do what that light is doing and how that shadow's changed now. And, you know, so.
You know, in short, painting is any visual art, literature, or music. It's a language.
Yes.
You have to formulate a language from which you precede things. So when you're sitting down looking or making notes on a page, or sculpting, you know, if you don't have the language, then you become concerned and imprisoned by all of these things you're looking in front of you. You don't have a formulation from which to express yourself to do them. Language is the most difficult thing. A lot of artists have natural language. Others have to try to develop one through a lot of method and instruction of how you can do things. How do you do it? People learn. I mean, plein air painting has become a sport. And everybody goes and they all get together and they go out and they plein air paint. And primarily they're making pictures. And what defines the better plein air painter from the one who's not so good is they have better method and technique. But they're trying to do the same thing. They're picture making. And there can be some great beauty to that. And it does work, particularly for the audience in large part. because they're reminded of what they want to see. So that's basic.
Not this audience. This audience.
This is different, of course.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for this wonderful panel. Please open up guys. Thank you.
Beautiful.